So last week we kicked off the new year with a series focused on prayer, and if you missed that week, I just want to highly encourage you to go back and listen to that message. We kicked things off by talking about a framework to think about prayer. We looked at a thread that was woven throughout Scripture which ties together the idea of prayer and God's invitation to the garden, if you remember that. And that is a Garden of Eden-like experience where we get to be in the unhindered presence of God through prayer. And I hope that's been a meaningful way to think about prayer for you this week. It's been incredibly helpful that this is an ongoing invitation that we can accept to be with God. Very powerful thread that we see throughout the Scriptures. Well, today I'd like to talk to you about the idea of a prayer posture. Today is another step in shaping how we think about prayer. But today it will actually also have a lot of really practical application for your prayer life. And it's kind of fun because it might look differently for each of you. So there's a lot of different ways to think about it. But I want to talk about what is your posture when you come to prayer. Now, I'm not talking about like how straight are your shoulders when you begin to pray. Not that kind of posture. I'm talking about how you think about yourself in relationship to God and how that works out when you begin to pray. What happens when I want to start praying? This is actually very important, and how we think about it is very important. So we're going to look at a Psalm of David today and a few stories from the life of Jesus in the New Testament that will help us really understand how to approach meeting with God in the garden space. How we approach prayer. So first, what I'd like to do is let's turn to Psalm 46. And we're going to look at this psalm. Actually, we're going to read the whole psalm. You'll see it all on the screen. But before I read the psalm, there's one really cool thing I need to point out about the authorship of Psalm 46. This psalm, if you'll read, oftentimes psalms will say at the very top of it, before you get to the text, it might say who it's authored by, like it's a chorus meant to be sung by a choir, those kinds of things. You'll see that in the psalms. And what you see right ahead of Psalm 46 is that this psalm is attributed to a group called the Sons of Korah, which you might just read through that and be like, okay, I'm getting onto the psalm. Great, I don't know who that is. But this is actually really cool because it's shorthand for the crew that David had gathered together for all day and all night prayer in the tabernacle. This was essentially David's prayer experts that never stopped praying, not once, all day, all night. This is the group that is going to tell us about the posture from prayer in Psalm 46. That's pretty cool, right? All right, let's read it together. Zoe, could you go click on that first slide for me? Thank you. It reads like this. Actually, I'm going to go back. There we go. It reads like this. God is our refuge and our strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and the mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble and the waters surge. A river brings joy to the city of God and the sacred home of the Most High. God dwells in that city. It cannot be destroyed. From the very break of day, God will protect it. The nations are in chaos and their kingdoms crumble. God's voice thunders and the earth melts. These are incredible word pictures, right? The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Come and see the glorious works of the Lord. See how he brings destruction upon the world. He causes wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. He burns the shields with fire. What I love about what's happening right now is the psalm is so in awe of who God is and what he's done. It's like a song that's crescendoing till you get to the very chorus and you're just like, oh, and then it tells us what to do. It says, be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Woo! What a psalm, right? The first thing we notice from this psalm is that it starts out with a bang about God. We read all that. Psalm 46 immediately helps by shifting all our attention, all our focus, all our thoughts, not on you and me, but on God. The best posture for prayer doesn't begin with us. It begins with God. That's a really powerful and helpful insight as we enter into prayer, that the best posture of prayer doesn't begin with us, it begins with God. Author and theologian Philip Yancey writes this: prayer begins as an act of seeing reality from God's point of view. That's where it starts. And if you can't tell that the reality is that He is God and that He is on the throne, you and I are not. And I'm so thankful for this encouragement because I think, at least for me, it simplifies how we should posture ourselves in prayer. It gives us a starting place, no matter how it is that you come to God. Psalm 46 starts with us being in awe and wonder at who God is. It reminds me from even what we looked at last week, Paul, and that prayer moment where he's like, I experienced the Lord and it's all too wonderful for words. I don't even know what to say. That's how prayer should start for us, in awe and wonder of who God is. It starts strong, the psalm starts strong, and it doesn't let up. It sings the praises of God and crescendos, like I said, right up to the point where it tells us that what we should do as we reflect on the greatness of God. The group that David gathered together, the prayer experts that he gathered together to pray day and night in the tabernacle, give us this wisdom from their experience. First, enter prayer by reflecting on how great God is and what He can do, what He has done. Gaze up at God and be in awe. And then, because of all of that, be still and know that I am God. Oh, I love this. And I think it really connects to what we talked about last week, or God's invitation to come and rest in His unhindered presence. His invitation to come into the garden space of His presence. And it starts with us coming in awe and wonder and then being still. So when you're posturing yourself for prayer, stand in awe of the Creator and Sustainer of all things, and then stillness. This is important because I think this is not how we often enter prayer. Maybe it is for some of us. Maybe we've learned this over the years. Holly and I had a great time talking about this last week. I always say I'm Free Methodist, but I was trained by the Quakers because I went to George Fox University. And I got an opportunity to really study. One of my professors was incredible and helped me understand prayer in a really deeply significant way. One of the things I had to do to learn about stillness and quiet, he asked me to go into the prayer chapel once a day for 7 days in a row and sit in silence for 2 hours every day. That was tough. That's hard. But wow. And I'll tell you this experience at some point, but my calling experience into ministry happened through 3 really significant times of prayer. And the final calling experience that I had that I knew for sure God was calling me to a life of ministry happened the 7th day of silence in the prayer chapel at George Fox University. I'll never forget it. This is so important because we don't often come to prayer this way. Sometimes I think often we come to prayer in hurried crisis, burdened by many things, talking a mile a minute. And while all of that is appropriate to bring into prayer, the psalm is teaching us here that the first thing we need to do is come with a focus on God and then stillness. That's exactly what we need. And that's simple enough, right? Actually, I wish it was that easy. I think it's actually much more difficult than it sounds because the way of life that you and I have grown accustomed to as normal is a one which makes stillness, I think, nearly impossible. And I think that's getting worse in our culture. Not only has the pace of life increased over the past few decades, but now things like technology make distraction almost impossible to avoid, right? I mean, let's just take one little example. I don't typically have this in my pocket up here so that I don't get distracted. I usually leave it in my office, but I wanted to have our board list too. But let's just take one example of this incredibly addictive yet little powerful computer that's in our pockets, at least for most of us. Anybody remember what it was like waiting at a bus stop or being stuck in traffic or sitting in a theater before the movie began or maybe having to wait in the waiting room of an appointment with nothing to do for your mind but wonder? Maybe even talk to someone? That never happens anymore. The statistic is that we reach out and touch our smartphones on average of every 30 to 40 seconds. Isn't that crazy? I heard someone reflect a lot this past week that all those are little moments they're little moments, potential portals of prayer. Little moments throughout our days to wake up to the reality of God all around us. Now all those little moments, he writes, are swallowed up by the digital carnivore. I don't want to lay on the guilt too much because this is the reality of our world. We have to deal with this. But I wonder if our new normal of hurried distraction is robbing us of the ability to know what it means to be still and present. Present to God, present to other people, present to all that's good and beautiful and true in our world, and even present to our very own souls. So let's ask this question: is there a practice from the way of Jesus that could help us with this? Is there a time-tested, scripture-based way that could set us up to thrive and feel God's peace maybe in the midst of the chaos of the modern society? And as you might guess, because I've already given it to you, the answer is yes. The answer is to be still and know that I am God. Now, I want to jump to the New Testament real quick, and I want us to look at a couple of stories in the life of Jesus, because I think we see this in Jesus' life. You've heard this before, but I want to just encourage you to think about this afresh again this morning. At the end of Matthew chapter 3, there's a fascinating story about Jesus, and it is his baptism. And here's what it says in Matthew chapter 3, starting in verse 16. After his baptism, as Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and settling on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my dearly loved Son, who brings me great joy." Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. Sounds fun. For 40 days and 40 nights, he fasted and he became very hungry. So when Jesus comes up out of the water, there's literally a voice from heaven saying, "This is my dearly loved Son who brings me great joy." Talk about an emotional and spiritual high, a direct connection with God, right? We want that when we have these encounters, when we go into prayer. We want to connect with God like that. And this is happening here for Jesus. This is more than just an emotional and spiritual high. It is the launching pad from which Jesus is sent into the world. This is super exciting. Very important moment. And then the very next line, after all that happens, says, "And then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness." Maybe you know this, but the first thing that Jesus did here is head straight to this wilderness space. Now, this wilderness here, this word doesn't necessarily mean like a desert or a sand and heat and barren geography. The word here can actually be translated in a number of different ways, including solitary place, lonely place, or quiet place. In fact, as you see this word used throughout the scripture, the New Testament applied to Jesus, it's often translated as quiet place. So after Jesus has this incredibly high spiritual experience, the dove descends on him. He goes to be still and quiet. And you see this in Jesus' life after these incredible encounters and before these significant acts of ministry. For Jesus, he has to be in the quiet place. There are several stories in all four Gospels where we're told about Jesus and his practice, about his relationship to the quiet place. It was the starting place for his ministry, and it is what gave him the strength and the fortitude to face the most difficult tasks of his mission. It's the place where Jesus recovered his strength and where he reconnected with God. And that's why we see Jesus coming back to it over and over and over again, to the quiet place of prayer. This is compelling as we think about this call. Mark chapter 1 is another example of this. But what gives Mark chapter 1 more weight is when you realize the circumstances around this story. Mark chapter 1 is another retelling of the baptism of Jesus. But after Jesus comes back from the wilderness in Mark chapter 1, what we find is essentially an event of the first day of Jesus on the job, right? He comes back. He's ready to go in ministry. He's the Messiah, the revealed Messiah from his baptism here. And it's his first day on the job. His first day on the job is crazy. It is a marathon day of ministry. The first day he comes back from the wilderness. He was up early. He was teaching in the synagogue. He's casting out multiple demons. He heals Peter's mother-in-law over lunch. He teaches some more, right? Then he's up late healing people who it says were sick with various diseases. What a day. Exhausting, right? If you think about all that he did. So what does Jesus do after a long and exhausting day of ministry? We find in Mark 1, verse 32. Sorry, I'm a little behind here. We find in Mark 1, 35. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. This is incredible. And one commentator or author I read this last week hilariously wrote this. If you think about it, it's really true. You would think that Jesus would have, after a very long and exhausting day, slept in, gone for a light run, and then had brunch with his disciples. Nothing says post-Sunday recovery like a farmer's scramble. Right? But that's not what Jesus did. Instead, after this very long, exhausting day of ministry, he's up early and he goes to his quiet place. So you think about the importance of the stillness in Jesus' life and ministry. And after he was baptized, he went to the quiet place for a month and a half. He came back to Capernaum and did one day of ministry and then went right back to his quiet place the next morning to be still and to pray. So we can see that for Jesus, this practice wasn't a one-time thing. It was an ongoing rhythm of his life. And it was vital to who he was for a deep connection with God. Jesus says yes to God's invitation to the garden over and over and over. And what's fun is as this story continues, his disciples actually find Jesus as he's quiet and praying in his quiet place. And they're all caught up in the hurry and the busyness and the felt importance of that moment. And they go to find him, and they find him, he's still quiet and praying. And I think maybe even in the most a more surprising moment, they're almost in a panic. And they plead with him to get back to work. Jesus, there's so much to do. We need you. People are looking for you. Come on, this is great. And I can just imagine his calm presence as he looks at them and he says, sorry, everyone, it's time to move on. Another commentator I read this week wrote this. Jesus came out of the wilderness with all sorts of clarity about his identity and calling. He was grounded, centered, in touch with God himself. From that place of quiet prayer, he knew precisely what to say yes to, and just as importantly, what to say no to. From the Gospels, you quickly realize that the quiet place, Jesus' practice of stillness and prayer, was a top priority for his life. Time and time again, Jesus seems to embody what David's prayer experts told us is a good idea for prayer. I love how the Old Testament and New Testament connect here, right? First, standing in awe of who God is and what he's done, remembering that is our reality. He is on the throne. He is God. He's the one who saves and rescues. And then in that, we come in stillness. God is our refuge and our strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. And then, a few verses later, be still and know that I am God. What I love about the admonition to stillness is that it's an invitation to shape our practices of prayer around something that I didn't do a lot at first: listening. Typically, for many of us, prayer is characterized, like I said before, by talking. But I see in Jesus an invitation to a prayer that is characterized first by stillness and listening. This will have an effect on showing us just how noisy and busy our internal reality can be. Have you ever experienced that? In those moments of prayer, when I was in the prayer chapel those first few days, it's easy to turn off the external noises, turn down the radio, turn off the phone, and close the door to the prayer chapel. to maybe take a good walk, right? But it's the internal noise that's a different story. I realized in those spaces just how many thoughts I had rushing through my head that maybe I wasn't aware of, how I felt so deeply about this or that actually kind of surprised me. And then I began a process of just letting those things, holding those things open-handed to God. God, I need your help with this. But I couldn't get to that space without stillness and quiet and listening. What happens is those other voices slowly fade, and in that silence we begin to hear God speak to us, his love for us, who we are in him. He clarifies our identities, and he reinforces who he is, and we get perspective on life that we desperately need. Oh, it's so good. Be still and know that I am God. So as we think about this approach to prayer, as we think about how it is that we come to God, I'm aware that there are many different ways to pray. Pastor Holly next week is going to talk about a specific way of prayer. But as we hear God's invitation into the fullness of his presence, we see that the best way to begin, our best prayer posture, is one that begins with standing in awe of God and then stillness and listening. And that is the best way to begin prayer, no matter what it is you're going to be doing, no matter what kind of prayer you're going to be practicing. This is a good first step into any type of prayer. Worship team, would you come on back up? And I'd like to end with this. A pastor reflected on this practice of stillness and quiet prayer. Before I read this, as I read this, I just would invite you to think about, what does this look like in your life? Do you have a time of stillness? Even if that might be difficult. I understand seasons of life are hard. If you're a parent with kids, that's difficult, possibly. If you're busy at work or have lots of different things with family, you're going here and there, lots of stuff to do at the house, I know that it's tough to find time to do this, but I just want to encourage you to look at your patterns of life and find a time where, like Jesus did over and over again, you can have some time. When Pastor wrote this, I wouldn't miss it for the world. He's talking about a practice of quiet prayer. It's usually the best part of my day, hands down, and I'm not even a morning person. I say we bring back quiet time and rock it like it's 1999. Here's to tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, and coffee. The chair by the window, the window by the tree, time to breathe, a psalm and a story from the Gospels, hearing the Father's voice, pouring out my own. Or just sitting and resting. Maybe I'll hear a word from God, and that will alter my destiny. Maybe I'll just process my anger over something that's bothering me. Maybe I'll feel my mind settle like untouched water. Maybe my mind will ricochet from thought to thought, and it'll never come to rest. If so, that's fine. I'll be back the same time tomorrow, starting my day in the quiet place. How about you?